Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has made new strides in pushing back a federal government intent on controlling all aspects of Canadian policy with no regard to jurisdiction. This week, Premier Smith proposed new legislation which would ensure her government's sign-off before Trudeau inks deals with municipalities. And in doing so, the Premier revealed that she's taking her lead from another Canadian province. A province that has its own pension plan, controls its own immigration, and even refers to itself as a society distinct from the rest of English Canada. Quebec is no stranger to playing tough with the federal government. And while Quebec and Alberta are rarely seen as allies, I think most of us here in Western Canada have some begrudging respect for French Canadians who seem to have no problem getting what they want from Ottawa. But let's not forget, Quebec has long utilized the threat of separation to get a fair deal from the federal government. So sure, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is playing hardball now, but we haven't even played our royal flush. I'm Rachel Emmanuel, and this is the Alberta Roundup.
Rachel Emmanuel brings the news each day on Alberta Roundup. She has her say.
Okay guys, taking a look at our first story here. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is following Quebec's lead as she proposed new legislation this week which would force the federal government to receive the Alberta government's sign-off on deals it hopes to strike with municipalities. The proposed legislation is titled the Provincial Priorities Act and seeks to enforce Section 92 of the Constitution, which states that municipalities fall under the jurisdiction of the provinces, not the federal government. Here's what Alberta Premier Danielle Smith had to say about it this week, Wednesday.
Those federal dollars come with ideological strings attached, offering funding on its own terms, bypassing the provinces, and forcing municipalities to dance to Ottawa's tune, like funding for so-called safe supply or electric buses that don't work. Well, what we really need is envelope funding to expand existing provincial programs that already exist in these areas. Funding for what Alberta's priorities are that we need. Federal interference, we don't. Ottawa should be staying in its own lane. The way we see it, federal and provincial funding should be spent collaboratively, not at cross purposes. And it should be spent on Alberta's priorities and not on Ottawa's, because after all, a lot of that money came from hardworking Alberta taxpayers in the first place.
The Premier also revealed that other provinces have complained about Ottawa stepping over their jurisdiction to reach municipalities when she was speaking with all other premiers at the Council of the Federation in Nova Scotia in November 2023. She said it was at that meeting that the federal Quebec minister gave the other provinces a copy of Quebec legislation, the same legislation which Premier Smith has now used to create the Provincial Priorities Act. And while addressing the Provincial Priorities Act at the Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference on Friday, Premier Smith also took aim at Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Take a listen.
When you see in Alberta that we are going to take a posture more like Quebec, which is no thank you, we don't need your policy advice on school lunch programs, on pharmacare, on dental care, that is just give us the money and trust that we'll be able to deliver on this. That's the approach that we're going to take, and we're going to be pretty vocal about doing so, and I hope to see some of the other premiers do it.
Also at the Canada Strong and Free Networking Conference, my colleague Andrew Lawton had the chance to ask Premier Smith why she hasn't axed the provincial carbon tax. We know that the federal carbon tax has increased once again and gas is more expensive than ever. Premier Smith has been facing some criticism for not cancelling the provincial tax. Here's what she had to say about it.
So I would say that I cannot sacrifice our need to gain revenue, to build roads, to make room for them to continue with the punitive tax that does nothing. Because a couple of things I'd say. The argument that they make that it will encourage people to change behavior, they completely undermine, because Stephen Guilbeault admitted that the carbon tax isn't going to have an effect until 2060, which means we're all paying punitive taxes until then, and there really just aren't options. I was talked to any of the automakers and the auto dealers, that if you wanted to go out and switch to an electric vehicle tomorrow to avoid the tax, you couldn't, because there aren't enough of them being produced, and the infrastructure isn't in your home to do it, and the infrastructure isn't there for public charging station to do it. Hydrogen vehicles as well. We have 100 of them in Alberta. We've got a 5,000 car challenge, but if you wanted to go out and buy a hydrogen zero emissions vehicle, you couldn't, because they're not producing enough of them. If you wanted, in my province, where I think 90% of the homes are heated with natural gas, If you simply couldn't switch to a heat pump because they don't work in -35, and you can't get insurance if you do without having a backup of some other type of heating. So all it is then, if there isn't a reasonable way to switch to an equal or lower cost option, then all it is a punitive tax on consumers. That's the reason why they're different.
Okay guys, moving into our next story here. A few weeks ago, I took aim at the Canadian Junos, and I was right to do so. There's very few Canadian musicians that we can actually be proud of or want to listen to nowadays. They're all jumping over each other in their efforts to be more woke than the person that came before them, because they're not actually talented. They're just using their politics to try to get some attention. Well, I have some good news for all of you who are hoping to find some Canadian content that you actually like and that you're actually ideologically aligned with. My cousin Daniel Roy has released 3 new tracks. You can find them on YouTube or Spotify under Daniel Roy. He actually left Canada during the COVID-19 pandemic. He lived in Ontario like me, and he simply couldn't stomach the pandemic policies anymore. So he left to Austin, Texas in search of some freedom. We're going to play a clip of his music for you now.
I follow freedom, and a free man's what I'll be. I don't avoid all mistakes, but God knows I'm trying to wipe up each tear that escapes from your
I suggest you all go give his 3 new tracks a listen and a subscribe and a follow on YouTube and Spotify. As I mentioned, it is hard to find Canadian content that we like and that we can be proud of. And when there are people who are talented and who are aligned with our views, I think it's important that we support them. So I recommend you go give those songs a listen and let me know what you think about them in the comments below. Okay, everyone, moving into the controversy of the week. A UCP MLA is telling Alberta NDP MLA Marlon Schmidt to seek anger management treatment after a verbal altercation between the two resulted in the Legislative Assembly Security Service to intervene. UCP MLA Jackie Lovely was in the members' lounge on Monday following a speech on a private members' bill on urban parks when a verbal altercation occurred between her and Schmidt. That altercation became the subject of a lengthy point of privilege in the chamber on Tuesday. Here's Government House Leader Joseph Scow speaking to that effect.
When she told the member that, and I quote, "You are scaring me," he outright mocked her in an aggressive and intimidating manner. He mocked her, Mr. Speaker. As she tried to leave, the member from Edmonton Goldbar followed her, sought her out to continue this onslaught of harassment. In fact, a member from the Legislative Assembly Security Service had to intervene and tell the opposition member to, quote, "take a walk."
After Scow was finished speaking, Schmidt rose in the chamber to offer his, quote, own version, end quote, of the events. He said that Lovely instigated the dispute by continuing the conversation outside the chamber. He also said he wasn't following the female UCP MLA, but was merely headed in the same direction as her. He also offered his apology. House Speaker Nathan Cooper called Schmidt's actions inappropriate, but said the matter was now settled because the NDP MLA had offered his apology. Moving into what we're watching in the weeks to come, Alberta has applied for intervener status in the Parents' Bill of Rights case currently before the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal. Saskatchewan parental rights legislation requires that parents be notified when children under the age of 16 choose to go by a different pronoun at school. The provincial government invoked the notwithstanding clause in response to legal challenges from LGBTQ advocacy organizations, which contested the law's compatibility with charter rights. The University of Regina Pride Centre for Sexuality and Gender Diversity filed an action against the government of Saskatchewan in August 2023. The Minister of Justice here in Alberta and in Saskatchewan filed a joint statement saying, quote, "Saskatchewan and Alberta agree that the key figures in children's lives are their parents, and our provinces are both committed to supporting families and children so that they can work through unique needs together. Notifying parents and requiring their consent before a child's name or pronouns can be changed in schools, and before classroom discussions about gender identity and other sensitive subjects occur, ensures that the parent-child relationship is respected and paramount." Of course, there's nothing controversial about that. It just goes to show how far our society has fallen that we even have to be having these conversations. And of course, Alberta is choosing to apply for intervener status before they table their own parental rights legislation, which is expected this fall. I'm sure we can expect to see some challenges of that when it comes. Okay, everyone, moving into our weekly comment roundup. Last week, we talked about Calgary Mayor Jyoti Gondek. She, of course, succeeded in passing that recall, but she was booed at a Calgary Flames game a little while ago, and I asked you all what you thought of that. Many of you said that a politician should not be shown respect until they show respect to the people. Let's take a look at some of your comments. User @GrannyB says, why should we show respect for politicians who have absolutely no respect for citizens? Respect is earned. Like I said, I saw many such comments to that effect. And user Enigma Fidelity said, wait. Are you saying booing is impolite? Okay, so anybody who thinks she shouldn't be booed needs to learn what democracy means. We, the people, will voice our opinion. We will be heard. If you have a problem with the voos, did you have a problem with the convoy? I think I get one of these comments at least every week where I present two different sides of the coin and ask you all what you think, and someone says, you think this. No, I never said I think this. I simply presented two different sides and asked you all what you thought. I personally don't care that Jyoti Gondek was booed at a Calgary Flames game. I think that she is anti-Canadian. This is someone who is continually raising taxes during a period when many people are struggling to afford basic necessities. Maybe she should look at cutting some of her own government spending. But even worse than that, this is someone who actually tried to cancel Canada Day celebrations. So I hold no love for Jyoti Gondek in my heart. I don't think she's doing a good job. I think she should resign. And I think that's fairly obvious to people who watch my show consistently. Okay, everyone, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, please don't forget to subscribe to True North so you don't miss any of our content, and like this video. If you are feeling so inclined to, you can support our work over at donate.tnc.news. I will see you all on Wednesday. Have a great weekend. God bless.